Episode 2.
Hey, welcome to Geek Tangent episode number 2. We're glad to have you with us. My name is Chris.
I'm Doug.
This is Keith.
And this is Stefan.
Hey, we're back this week with some fresh new topics for you. We got a whole bunch of stuff for you this week. We're going to spend a little time talking about the new Deadpool movie, which we've all seen already. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the sharing economy, what we each see as some sort of pros and cons of this new movement. And I'm sure we'll have some other equally brilliant observations. We're going to close out the episode with a segment we're calling The Latest Hotness. We're each going to bring something to the table that's been catching our attention lately, talk just a little bit about it. Maybe we'll learn something new along the way. So let's throw some chimichangas in the microwave and get it going.
Deadpool the movie. So finally, Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool movie came out. He's been talking about this for years. He's given up on it a few times. It keeps getting resurrected. This is the movie that was always supposed to be made. They introduced the Deadpool character in the Wolverine XMen Origins movie, and they completely butchered the character. They showed him with his mouth sewn shut.
Yeah.
Totally spoiled the character. So it's amazing that they finally made this movie. They made it rated R. They were true to the real character. I can't believe they made this movie. But I'll tell you what, like, as much as people were looking forward to this movie, there was a part of me that I don't want to say I didn't care, because the character turned into a cool character. But, you know, I was still reading comics off and on through the 90s. And when you got to the 1990s, that's when Marvel started to stink. The writing went down the tubes. The company's going bankrupt. This is why they sold Spider-Man to Sony to make movies. This is why they sold the X-Men to Fox to make movies. Marvel was out of ideas and out of money. They're about to go out of business. Today, it's a very different story. But Deadpool, when it was first created, it was Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld, if you type into your little Google search box, talentless hack at Marvel Comics, boom, Rob Liefeld is the top hit you're going to get. Deadpool, the character is Wade Wilson. It's based on Deathstroke from DC Comics, Slade Wilson. It's the exact same character with the guns, the two swords. Deathstroke is a badass character in DC, and they're using him quite a bit now. He's the main bad guy on the Arrow TV show, which I have to admit, I don't really watch that one. I tried. It is such a CW thing. It's all teen angsty. But anyway, they since Liefeld left and he went to Image Comics, other writers at Marvel started writing the character the way he is now, snarky, funny, breaking the fourth wall all the time, which to me is difficult to have it work in a movie, and they did a good job in the film.
So Keith, was he not that way when they first introduced him in the comic books?
He was a run-of-the-mill bad guy. He was, you know, I think it was X-Force or X-Factor, one of those X comics with people with pouches all over their suits for some reason. And he was just a standard bad guy who worked in a team. And he was a rip-off character. And someone at Marvel sort of reinvented him and gave him this personality. And it's now a beloved and hilarious character. They had to push the book over to Marvel Knights, which is their more gritty and sort of PG-13 to rated R material at Marvel. And the character works there, and he's, you know, well, you see what the movie was, and it was absolutely hilarious, violent as all hell, and a lot of fun.
And he's been a significant character in the Marvel, like a popular character for a number of years now, right?
Right, yeah, because he was created, I believe it was 1990 or 92, something. It was early 90s.
Yeah, I think 91.
Yeah. So, you know, he's been around for a little while, but it took some time for them to sort of find the footing for this character and define him properly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we wound up seeing it on Saturday night. Stefan, Doug, and I went. Doug was really, really big on it. I'm kind of, you know, we didn't really spend that much time talking about it after the fact. So I'm actually kind of interested to hear what Doug thinks of it, having sat on it for a few days now.
I mean, I fucking love that movie. Like I was like, from the credits, like everything was just sarcasm, and that's pretty much, you know, right up my alley. And you know, for me, I've always liked like the Marvel movies and stuff like that, but I never read the comics. So I was always like, oh, they're just kind of like cheesy superheroes. And I know that Wolverine has his claws and Storm can change the weather and all that shit. But like, I thought, I never knew anything about Deadpool. And then I like read some stuff about it and I'm like, this guy sounds really cool. And like, having never read the comics and kind of knowing like Ryan Reynolds as an actor, I was like, well, he's like the guy that's born to play this, as Keith said. So I went in with really kind of high expectations, and I think they were met pretty well. I thought the comedy was really good. I loved the constant barrage of sarcasm and one-liners throughout the whole movie. It just kept me really interested. And there's a little part of me that goes into that movie where I was like, Ryan Reynolds has built a career on one-liners and sarcasm. That's basically every character he plays in every movie.
True.
Yeah.
But it just really worked. Like, it was just perfect for this, and it was just such an about face to the typical superhero movie that it made me smile, because there's so much. They're all good, but there's so many of them right now. And the fact that it's kind of like spit in the face of that and was just like, we're gonna have fun and talk about chimichangas and fart jokes and IKEA furniture for 2 hours, and I really dug it.
What did you think about all the fourth wall breaking? I thought there were a few times where it kind of, when he goes to the X mansion and he says, the studio could only afford, 2 X-Men. And it's like, well, that's probably really true. Like, once in a while, I thought it sort of poked fun at itself in a way.
Yeah, it was definitely
totally
self-deprecating. I mean, that was half the charm of it.
Although
I
finally
think
we get Colossus.
Yeah.
I love the McAvoy. Are we going to get McAvoy or Stewart this time? That was just like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, right. Like, some of that stuff was kind of weird, I thought.
That was great. Oh,
yeah. Well,
I mean, I think that's always been part of the breaking the fourth wall has always been part of the Deadpool character. So I think they had to keep that aspect in the film for it to be sort of true to the way that character should be played, particularly by Ryan Reynolds. I mean, if you want to get down to the actual plot of the film, it's really pretty pedestrian and nondescript and could be any of another dozen other generic superhero movies.
Generic English bad guy,
Yeah, like the opening credits said, which frankly were brilliant.
That was amazing. Oh my god!
There's a little part of me that wants to say that opening credit sequence was the best part of the movie, and everything else from there was a little bit of a downhill slide, which is unduly harsh because I did also really enjoy the film.
I had a super audience. I was the only person laughing at the opening credits. Everyone else was like deadpan. Like, are you people reading this stuff? Like, it just said some douchebag was the producer. It's like, that's funny.
Yeah,
I'm the only guy laughing.
The douchebag was the director. The producers were asshats, if I remember correctly.
I stand corrected.
Gratuitous cameo was my favorite.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just the way they managed all the camera angle around. I mean, whatever. Spoiler alert, whatever. But the way they did that whole shot. Never mind the fact that they didn't even name any of the people that worked on the movie, apart from these derogatory slurs on them.
Yeah, it was like a stop
way
motion.
They moved around. It was amazing. Yeah, it was great. I mean, they set the stage and the tone so perfectly right from the get-go. It was friggin' cool.
And there actually was he had really good chemistry with the girl in the movie, so I thought the story elements were decent, which are never true with Marvel movies, except for I think Captain America's story is great. Both of those movies.
Yeah.
They were loose with I know they don't have to be true to X-Men canon, but they sure as hell weren't. His girlfriend, they gave her the right name. She's Copycat. Yeah. She's a super bad guy too.
Yeah, I learned that just today, actually.
There were tons of characters. I understand they have to write the movie they're going to write, but I was talking to Chris earlier. The Negasonic Teenage Warhead, that is a real X-Men character that existed for one comic. It's lasted for one comic, and they killed her. So that character, I thought, was an amalgamation of Wolvesbane and Cannonball from the original New Mutants. And then when she finally got in that final fight with the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, I was surprised to see that, by the way. She was wearing the New Mutants yellow costume from the old 80s, which I appreciated that little nod to us, 40-year-old nerds.
I thought that was great. The fact that was the broken down helicarrier, presumably from Winter Soldier. That was a great setting for that.
Surprised they got away with that.
And I love the Cannonball. As you were describing her power being like Cannonball, I love the way they did that. Just like the sonic, not the sonic boom, but like the massive bloom blasting thing. That was great.
It was nice to see.
I'd love
to see Sunspot.
Super powers from Destiny.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it kind of is actually in a way.
Yeah.
So one of the other things I was reading was the fact that, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows this by now, but the movie raked in like 135 or 150 million over the first weekend, which I guess for an R-rated movie is unprecedented. I guess
Set a record. Yep.
And clearly that's going to open the door for other grittier / more foul language, superhero movies. I mean, the most obvious example would be yeah. I was thinking of Wolverine.
Bishop. Yeah.
They're going to do, I know what's his face is going to do one more Wolverine movie, and then he's kind of like done.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they use this as license to really grit it up more than they ever have. And there's, what better character to do that with?
Although then again, we saw a rated R comic book movie in the 80s in RoboCop, and you'd think that would open the door for more, and it really didn't.
Wasn't The Watchmen R-rated?
It should have been. It might have been, actually. Maybe it was PG-13. But there was certainly
I think it was an R. I mean, you
nudity,
had Dr. Manhattan's huge swinging Blue Johnson in that thing.
Fair enough.
Like, the girl was naked.
You kind of have to give that an R.
Yeah.
That's very funny.
That's another podcast, by the way, if we want to do Watchmen.
Right. Yeah. No kidding. We were, as most people probably know, the movie basically got greenlit because they had done some test footage a couple of years ago that quote unquote got leaked online, and there was such an uproar about how great it was that clearly, is it Fox that did this, by the way?
Yeah, this was Fox.
Yes, Fox owns all the mutants.
Okay, which makes me wonder why they had a problem using any of the other X-Men. I mean, oh no, wait, that's 20th Century, same company, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why could they have used more of the X-Men characters? I'm wondering. Anyhow,
money.
That's a sidebar. Yeah, I guess so. But so that leaked footage obviously is what greenlit this movie ultimately. And I went back and watched that test footage today, and it's like almost completely verbatim significant chunks of that intro fight. I mean, tone-wise, looks-wise, move-wise, I mean, they really practically just used the original test footage and dropped it in there and added more stuff to it. It was pretty crazy.
Well, another thing, it's funny that you bring that up, Chris, because, you always hear like, well, the best parts are in the trailer.
Yeah.
But basically, it was just the opening credits scene in like the first fight was the whole trailer, which I thought was awesome. Like, I was like, oh, there's like a whole movie still to come. I was excited to like not have to wait for that scene and be like, okay, here comes the trailer part.
Here it goes.
You know what I mean?
Well, as you know, Doug, afterwards, one of my gripes about it was that I did enjoy it, but I was distracted by the fact that I felt like I kind of knew the movie already. And that's my own fault because I had eagerly watched the trailers a number of times. So, once you do that, of course, you see some of the big stroke scenes because they invariably put that shit in the trailers. But you also get a real sense of what the tone of the movie is going to be like, and you can kind of fill in a lot of the blanks. And I'll tell you, it's another one of those examples where I from like going forward, I just have to stop watching trailers. I did that for the Star Wars movie, and it made a huge difference. I was like militant about that, but now I realize like I just got to stop watching trailers. Period.
Yeah, that's what I've done.
Drives me nuts. But anyhow, once I got past that, you step back and go, actually, this is a really fun damn movie.
Yeah.
Yep, really was.
Enjoyed it a lot.
Anything we're missing?
I give it a 3.5 chimichangas.
Yeah, right. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. In case you didn't realize it by now, you're listening to Geek Tangent. If you like what you hear, please help spread the word by taking a moment to write a review for us on iTunes or share this podcast with your friends. Thanks. So, hey, we're back. And for our second topic, we're going to be talking about the sharing economy. This is something that Doug brought up to us a couple of weeks ago. He sort of called it the Uberization of services, which for obvious reasons, of course. And this is one of those topics, we're all probably familiar with many of the tools that sort of make up this new quote-unquote sharing economy. But the more you think about it, it's definitely one of those areas that has all sorts of subliminal implications and stuff like that. Sounded like a great idea. So, Doug, give us an idea of what you were sort of thinking about when you brought this up.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what was really interesting to me about this topic of Uberization and the sharing economy was it feels really cool, but I think it's because maybe there's a generational thing, or there's there's an ageist thing where I think the younger people are, the more kind of this stuff they expect to happen, to expect to be around because it has been. But to me, it's like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, who would have thought like I could have just hired a stranger to give me a ride somewhere, or
Yeah, totally.
go stay in someone's house when I'm going to visit a friend. Like it's just
Mhm.
it's such a if you brought this back in time like 10 years, it would be such a crazy idea. But the fact that I think, and I think it has to do with mobile technology and and the internet, being, what it is now. Um, I think it's kind of a radical thing if you kind of take a step back and think about it. And, when we were speaking offline, and I think this is a great point to kind of jump in, is it is completely about trust. Do you trust a stranger to give you a ride? Do you trust someone to give you a comfortable stay at a house that you've never been to? Like, do they trust you to stay in their house? It's such a I think it's a cool thing, not only from a convenience and like where technology can kind of take us, but also kind of it is kind of bringing people together, and it's kind of a positive thing to see people helping people as opposed to companies helping people. So that's kind of where my head was at when I was thinking about this.
I think the economy has something to do with that too, where people are looking for a second revenue stream, whatever. And, hey, I can drive Uber 2 days a week. You can make your own schedule, get a couple bucks for yourself. And like you say, you don't have to get a big company involved.
Yeah, there's definitely something about. I feel like there's a bit sort of a confluence of things that have sort of happened at once. That the slowdown of the economy that happened in the late aughts, I guess it is roughly, and at the same time, just like Doug was saying, this where we now have this mobile technology where not only is it easy to instantaneously communicate with each other, but they're GPS enabled, which opens up a whole new world. I mean, basically all these components that obviously make up services like Uber, and there, I think at the same time. You could also consider things like Yelp, which has become so popular for over the years, as the user review thing, and that plays an element to these things. And we've all grown accustomed to having access to more information about a potential service than we otherwise would, and you have a more accurate way of gauging whether or not it is literally trustworthy or good in the case of a restaurant or something like that. And I feel like a whole bunch of these different elements have come together, and I'm just so jealous of these people who just go, you know what? There are people in the world that have a car. All I have to do is write an app that tells them how to get in touch with people who need rides. I don't have to build any infrastructure or anything. That sort of stuff's just incredible.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think what's also incredible is that people kind of people feel like there's a right to expect an alternative. You know what I mean? And it feels like along back a while back, uh, you wanted to stay, if you wanted to go on vacation, you stayed at a hotel. Like that's what you did. You know what I mean? There wasn't really.
Sure.
I mean, some people might go to a bed and breakfast, but that's the same thing. You're going to it's a small business or a company, and you're paying them to stay in their establishment or their building. But it's just kind of a cool thing that just things sprouted up with, which it's trust, it's the economy, it's the technology.
And there's a time when the market demands it. In the
Yeah.
city of Charlotte, we had the Democratic National Convention here a few years ago. And while the city was mostly ready for it, there really weren't enough hotel rooms for all the media and all the people and all the politicos that show up. So guess what happened? People renting out their house.
Yeah.
And they were taking that week, renting their house for double what their mortgage was for that month. And boom, taking a vacation at the beach and just renting out their house. I consider doing it myself. A lot of people made a lot of money that way.
Have any of you guys used, I mean, obviously, we're sort of alluding to some of these services. I'm sure we've all used Uber, and I'll just say briefly that, like, I'm a huge fan of Uber for many different reasons. Just real fast, and I'm sure everybody sort of got the same sorts of reasons. First of all, it's sticking it to the taxis, which, where I am, taxis have always been the most god-awful experience in the world. So as far as I'm concerned, they can rot in hell. So I'm thrilled that there's somebody like Uber finally coming up that's totally challenging, and Lyft as well, for that matter. And the other part of it is I invariably have a really good experience. The drivers are much more pleasant. I have good conversations with them. It's cheaper, so just across the board, it's a better thing. The other one, and Keith, you were just alluding to this, things like Airbnb and Home Away. Have any of you guys actually used those in any cases?
Yes, I have used an Airbnb with some friends. Yep.
Where just out of curiosity, where'd you go?
It was actually up in Maine, blanking blanking on the town now. Oh God, Booth Bay Harbor.
Oh,
So
cool.
we were
That's
going up there.
beautiful.
That's where my wife and I got engaged, but we wanted to go up with a couple friends, and we had stayed at this couple that owned an inn. So we stayed at an inn, and then they're like, well, there's these really great like neighborhoods up here that people do a lot of Airbnbs, and they're right near the water, and they don't cost a fortune. So I didn't. This is from the people that we were staying there with, and it was really cool. It was really easy just to go on the site, see pictures of the rooms. The rates were really good, and it was just like this nice family that had a great place for us to stay, and it was cool. It was different. It was kind of like a little different venture as opposed to like, you know, handing our bags to somebody and
Holiday Inn.
staying in the
Yeah.
lobby, and you know what I mean. It's just a cool thing. You're home, like you're like in a home away from home. And it's pretty cool.
And it seems like travel and transportation are the first industries to really latch onto this. I was telling you guys earlier about a company I found called Booster Fuel, and it's a similar service to Uber. You put an app on your phone and you schedule for them to come out to wherever you are, and they'll gas you up. You can prepay with your phone. They just ask that you leave the little gas door open. When you're at your meeting, when you're at the dentist, whatever, boom, they show up, fill you up, you come out, you're full, done. You don't have to stop at a gas station. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'd never heard of that one till you mentioned it earlier.
I think they're only out in Washington right now, like Seattle and that area, West Coast. But I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. There's no upcharge
but
for
once gas gets more expensive, then as soon as they've stopped by, then your friendly neighborhood hoodlum comes by and siphons out that tank full of gas because your car is sitting there with its gas flap wide open.
I suppose. Yeah, nothing's perfect, but I think it's a great idea.
The nothing perfect thing brings something else to mind. I spent a little time reading about sort of the larger sharing economy, not having thought too much about it before we started considering this topic. And, some of the other things they brought up were sites that enable you to share tools with neighbors and things like that, which, as altruistic as it sounds, that was sort of one of the earlier impetuses to the sharing economy. And those are the sorts of efforts that basically failed. I think those smaller, like, I've got a drill I'm not using, people see these tools that they spend X amount of money for example, and they're using it for, 1/1000th of its life. And they figure, well, I could have somebody else use it. But it seems like those sorts of things wind up being more effort than it's worth. It's easier to buy a drill on Amazon. But my point being, there are so many potential things you could do with this sharing mentality, but in practicality, a lot of it sort of falls away, and you wind up with some of these larger things like the rental thing, which I have to say, like, that's basically how I look for accommodations now. Hotels are definitely low on the B list. I'm always looking for someplace to stay through Airbnb primarily, because like you guys are saying, it's just such a better experience. Yeah, you give up having somebody clean the bathroom or something like that, but you're getting like a genuine somebody's home or an apartment somewhere in the middle of the city or place you've been. It's just a better experience overall.
How many times have you used it, Chris, at this point?
Oh, I'd say like 3 or 4 now. I mean, when we went to Iceland back in November, we rented a house out there, and like we found this great mid-century modern style house right on the water, with mountains in the background and stuff. I mean, it's so much better than, just staying at a hotel in Reykjavik, which we did for the tail end of it, but you just get such a better experience. It makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be using Airbnb for the first time in about a month when I go to Hawaii.
Oh yeah,
for the first week when I'm on Oahu for my cousin's wedding, the whole family is doing. We've got like 3 different Airbnbs that we've lined up, but it'll be my first experience actually going to one, and I mean, I think I'm optimistic, and I do hear all of the pros that, like, you and Doug are talking about, and the fact that it's, it feels more like staying, at the home of a friend kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, as opposed to that monstrosity in Honolulu, that Hilton Hotel. My God, it's like 80 stories, this monstrous thing that sits on the beach. I'd much rather be in someone's house than that.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that style mega resort has zero appeal to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the cynic in me, the cranky. I'll take Keith's cranky old man role for this segment. There is part of me now. Admittedly, I didn't do nearly enough due diligence for this segment to really dig into the business models of either Airbnb or Uber. I don't know if they take a certain percentage off the top of every transaction that goes through them.
I know Uber does.
I'm assuming it's got to be something similar to that. And one of the things that's true about that is it puts the company in a position where they, the only employees that they have to have are tech staff maintaining the website, the database, that sort of stuff. But like in the case of Uber, all of your drivers are independent contractors who have to pay for their own insurance. They have to frankly probably not have the correct insurance to use their car as a commercial vehicle. There are all these kind of overheads that I think the company is avoiding liabilities, avoiding expenses, and sort of taking a slice of everybody's pie. And there is an element where, I mean, yes, when you have a great experience with that, yay, everybody wins. But if you're that 1 in 10,000 or whatever the ratio is that has a slightly shittier experience, you don't have nearly as much recourse, and you don't have the benefit of some of the regulations that have been put in place over the years that places like hotels and bed and breakfasts and whatnot have to comply with. And and there are reasons those laws and regulations got put in place. I mean, I was reading some articles where in order to be a licensed hotel in New York, you've got to have smoke detectors, you've got to have carbon monoxide detectors, you've got to have fire extinguishers, you have to have clearly marked routes of egress in the case of an emergency. And like if you look at the statistics from the mid 70s when a lot of those regulations were really first put into place until now, you end up you see a dramatic decline in the number of people who are dying in hotel fires or otherwise suffering from those things that those regulations were put in place to prevent. And there's an element where with an Airbnb you're kind of it's a crapshoot. And there have been some it's the kind of thing where when something bad happens, everybody hears about it, and so it's arguably gets coverage disproportionate to how real the danger is. But like I read one article about I think it was Taiwan, where a bunch of people rented out an Airbnb, and there was a water heater that was connected to the unit that was leaking all kinds of carbon monoxide. 4 people had to go to the hospital. 1 woman died. And that's because that particular Airbnb host, I don't think this was the first time they had hosted on Airbnb, but you don't have a safety inspector going to check out to make sure that the place is actually fit for human habitation. There are all these protections that you don't have with the sharing economy. And
I mean, Uber's dealing with that sort of thing too, of course, on many fronts. And one will hope that, yes, these things are going to have to become somewhat more regulated to more properly account for those sorts of things. I just hope that it doesn't wind up killing the business altogether.
Travis Kalanick, the CEO of Uber, was just doing a TED Talk out in Vancouver earlier this week. And the point of his talk was that, yes, they're sort of changing the way a lot of things are done. But in the end, what they feel that they're trying to do is make society a little better and have people able to trust each other a little more, and maybe not just be so suspicious of everyone. And if we have the
I'm going to play the cranky old man card. What they're trying to do is make a buck.
Well, that's true too.
And they're trying to, I mean, Airbnb, I think there are some estimates where they're being valued as more valuable than, I forget if it's Hyatt or one of the other hotel chains. It's like, no, I'm sorry, no. They don't own physical, properties. They're a clearinghouse for tying people together. But as much as I've been part of the .com economy for 20 years, and I believe in the .com economy. At the same time, I think that valuation is a little bit ridiculous, and I think that TED Talk is trying to put as positive a spin on it as they can. And yeah, as much like Google's much vaunted, our company motto is "Don't be evil."
Don't be evil.
Well, occasionally you dabble into the dark side there, Google.
Right.
And Airbnb. I mean, yes, they're encouraging us all to trust one another, but no, they want to make a buck, and they make a buck every time someone books through their service.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I guess I'm calling bullshit. I think that's marketing spin. And I don't think that when he goes to bed at night, he's thinking, I'm making the world a better place because everyone trusts one another. Kumbaya, kumbaya. I mean, I'm sorry, no.
It's for a good TED talk, though.
Yeah. And in fairness, I haven't listened to the TED talk, and maybe if I do, I'll come away feeling a little bit less cynical about it. But there's an aspect of this sharing economy, and particularly things like Uber and Airbnb, where there is one company that's sort of coming to dominate the market and is taking a slice of every transaction, where it's a way for them to essentially have a whole bunch of independent contractors that they don't have to pay health insurance for. They don't have to. There's so many costs that they're saving.
Oh, sure.
By using this model, by saying, hey, everybody's an Uber employee, but you're not actually.
That we're not paying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. I'm gonna. I guess I'll play the other counterweight to sort of close this one out. I have to admit that, and again, we focused a lot on Uber, but I think it's a good example of this because obviously it's so huge and everybody has experience with it to some degree. Many people do, at least, and can relate to it. But I got to say that as far as creating community, I'll be the first to admit that I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid on that one and say that, when I drive around with people, I actually have these generally great experiences. They're always interesting people. You wind up having like a human conversation that you would not have otherwise had. So I do agree that is not their main point. They're not like, hey, we're doing this so everybody feels closer to each other. Of course not. But there's also no denying that is a significant byproduct of this rather creative idea. So, I mean, regardless, clearly there are a lot of up in the air questions about all this stuff. And it's pretty obvious that these services are going to sort of change and morph a bit over time, just by necessity, if it's, whether it's about regulation or how people are using the services going forward. But this is definitely one of those areas of the economy and modern day services that's definitely a work in progress. And we're going to have to put a to be continued tag on it. So what do you say we use that as a spot to take a break?
Sounds good.
Cool.
Okay.
Break.
You're listening to the Geek Tangent podcast. Want to find out more about an item we've discussed? Want to suggest a segment idea? Want to tell us we have our heads so far up our asses that we're looking at our own belly buttons? Send us an email at contact@geek-tangent.com or post a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/geektangentpodcast.
All right, and we're back. And what we're going to do now is a segment we like to call the new hotness, where each of us, Chris, Doug, Stefan, and Keith, go over something that we like or kind of caught our eye lately in technology or music or culture or whatever have you, and kind of just rant on it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about first is this thing called ambient UX. And what ambient UX is think of Nest or think of Fitbit. It's all these sensors and the bouncing back and forth between the user and the device, and how all these things that it can gather can spit out back at you and give you real-time information in all kinds of different ways. And the cool thing about ambient UX is now, not only do people that design the apps have to worry about what you're seeing on the screen, but think about all the things that it has to deliver to you in different ways that it can deliver to you. There's a whole studies into how fast things should scroll on a page and what colors things should be in, and how long should things be on the screen before you see a new piece of information. So there's kind of this new dimension of user interaction between the person and the device, and it's you're not just staring at a watching a clock go by. you're watching the weather change, you're watching your heartbeat change, you're watching steps change. So there's all these new things that, designers and developers need to take into account when they're developing these apps and all these new services, because the information is going to come faster and faster and faster to the point where we're not even going to realize it anymore. It's just going to kind of be like this, this subconscious thing of we're just going to know what to look at and where to look. And it makes it harder on the designer's job to make sure that's as seamless as possible and make it as good as possible, because one person's experience is going to be completely different to the next. So I thought it was just interesting of, I was reading some articles about it and how a lot of these new things, like not Nest isn't so new anymore, but Google and Amazon are launching these online grocery stores where you can order things through their site, and based on what you order, they can kind of in in sync come up with the grocery list of the things that you're going to need based on your habits. And then there's a study of, well, do we do that visually? Do we do that as a list? So it becomes this huge checklist that designers and app developers have to deal with, not just beyond like, hey, we have to have a cool UX, but how does that user going to stomach all this information that we can now kind of pump onto them? And I thought that was really interesting.
It's fascinating how you take something that complicated and have to make it so simple, for
Yes.
the user and seamless, but behind the scenes, it's actually very complex.
Yeah. And now it's
Doug,
just exponentially blown up because there's so much more information that devices can give back to us now. So
Doug, as a designer, do you find that overload? Like, I mean, I can imagine that like the core of your job, perhaps at least originally when you were, in school or whatever, might not have included these sorts of things. And do you find that as this technology's, I guess this is a leading question, but as this technology is changing so fast, all of a sudden you find yourself responsible for like knowing shit about stuff you never expected to have to know?
yeah, but I've always been of the philosophy you can't teach creativity. So I think if you're a good designer and you know what you think looks good, and what is trending, and what you see out there in the marketplace, I think it's kind of beautiful chaos to a degree where you kind of have to embrace the fact that there's going to be a lot on the screen or a lot on the page or a lot in the whatever it is. You just have to make it look the best you can and make it simple. And I think design kind of did kind of a roller coaster recently, in my opinion, where I think back in when the web was first around, it was simple because that's what the tools allowed. And then when the tools came to an apex, there was like all this crazy shit on the web. There was, Flash was a huge thing, and augmented reality things on websites. And now we're kind of dipping back into like simple is beautiful, and like people want simple because there's so much stuff now.
Yeah.
And I think that the information has become more important than the design at this point, especially with like mobile devices and wearables and stuff like that. And I think Apple does a great job of it. They always have. But I think it's this next level of, we're in the user's brains now of like, they want to see something. Like if they, say for Google Glass, they have to look up in the corner to see something, or if they have an augmented helmet, there's going to be things they expect to see. And it's impossible to know what's going to work with people until they try a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Because you don't know how people are going to react to the color red when it's not on a screen, it's in front of their face. You know what I mean? It's just so many new kind of walls to break through to come up with the best experience. And I think that's going to be pretty interesting in the
That is
future.
really cool. It's one of those things where you just have to stop and think about it for a minute and go, oh yeah, that's a whole black hole you could dive down into with all the different possibilities.
And you got to be
stuff.
flexible, super flexible.
Yep.
Cool. So something I was thinking about this past week that I wanted to mention, this isn't necessarily sort of new hotness, frankly, but it's a thought that I kind of felt I wanted to get out there. I just finished reading a book about Steve Jobs. It's not the Isaacson book. It's a more recently released book called Becoming Steve Jobs, The Evolution of a Reckless Upstart into a Visionary Leader. And it's written by this pair of authors, one of whom is the editor-in-chief of Fast Company, I think it is, and he's had a relationship with Jobs for many years. Basically, this book was born in part as a reaction to the Isaacson book, which came out back in 2011, right around the time Jobs died, it turns out. And I don't know if any of you guys have read it. Many people have, of course, and it was sort of a big thing at the time. But that biography was basically sort of steered by Jobs. It's sort of the authorized biography, and it's very focused on telling the story from Jobs's perspective. And after the fact, a lot of the other players in his life story sort of voiced dissatisfaction with the portrayal of it. They felt it was a little one-sided. Perhaps it had to be. If all the information's coming from Jobs, then you're not really necessarily going to get the whole picture. So this book was written sort of in sort of direct reaction to it, and it involved the inclusion of many other significant people in Jobs' life and their input and their reflections on his personality. People like Tim Cook, his wife Lorraine, and many, many others. And so, I mean, it told the same basic story, but it definitely had some insight from these third parties who worked with him. Lasseter, the guy from Pixar, was involved in it, and you got to hear their perspective on the kind of person he was, most significantly, and as the title would suggest, sort of how he sort of grew from being the upstart guy that was brutal to everybody, and he was sort of a dictator and just really basically lacked people skills, which there's no denying, to someone who in his later years, although he still had as much drive, if not more, clearly, he kind of learned how to smooth out the edges enough to make him more functional, I guess is the term. It was basically just a really interesting contrast, and it really filled in some of the blanks, and I really appreciated it. But the thought that I walked away with was, having learned all this about the guy, I can find myself thinking about, since his death in 2011, there's been this sort of movement in terms of management. A lot of younger entrepreneurs want to mimic Steve Jobs by trying to behave in a management style similar to what they perceive his style to be, which is basically ruthless. Oh, clearly, if I'm a dick, I'm going to achieve success. And I think it was either Fast Company or Fortune who ran a big cover story on this a couple of years ago that I happened to catch. And it didn't quite click with me at the time, but after reading this book, I really kind of realized, boy, you're really missing the point. I mean, it's, mimicry is not necessarily the way to go. I mean, I think the difference is clearly Jobs had not only vision, many people do, but he clearly, and it wasn't just about, I came up with this cool widget, but he had definitely a worldview about what technology in a very broad sense could do for people. But not only that, what design could do. And he clearly saw what the world could be like. And that was his overall drive, much more broad than, I have this app that's really cool or whatever. And for him, it worked at the end of the day. But I think it's folly for young entrepreneurs and young managers to see that as a model. I can't help but to feel like, if you focus on what your dream is and what your ultimate idea is, and do what you can by being you to figure it out and make it succeed, then that's going to work. But don't try and mimic someone like Steve Jobs, because you're just going to become a cheap imitator, and that's all.
Well, you're just able to ape a single facet of who that person was.
Yeah,
you're never going to be the whole picture.
Exactly. And to one brief parallel, which will certainly speak to Keith and I don't know how much the people at large, but when I'm thinking about this stuff, I can't help but to think about guitarists. And, you get some legendary guitarist who's a groundbreaking musician in some way, shape, or form, introduces new things to the style. And oftentimes you wind up with a whole host of imitators who come up behind him or her doing the same sort of thing. Nobody cares about them. It's because you're missing the point. You're lacking the vision or the genuinely unique idea that's going to propel you to do these great things. You're just mimicking the machinery after the fact, and it just doesn't work.
Right.
Anyhow, so that was just sort of a random takeaway I had after reading and comparing these two books together. It's just something I wanted to get out there.
Thanks, Captain Segway. Speaking of great guitar players, if you remember our last episode, at the very end, while we're having our Bowie discussion, somehow Adrian Belew came up, and Chris and I had a little comment back and forth at the end. Well, speaking of Adrian Belew and great guitar players, I just wanted to bring up his app. It's an iOS app called Flux by Adrian Belew, and he himself is an avant-garde guitar player who's played with David Bowie and Frank Zappa, the Bears. He's had an extensive solo career. He's played with King Crimson. So he's someone he's married to a painter. He himself paints. So there's all kinds of art going on in his house. And he wanted to create an app that mixes music, art, and social media. And so what he ended up with was this thing called Flux. And it's an app that presents his music along with visuals in a way that it's never the same thing twice. It provides quick, random, surprising bits of music that are like short songs that he'll combine with longer tracks that have been cut up. He'll combine them with snippets of new guitar noises and effects. All these things are randomized and reassembled into a unique track every time you reload it. So every time you open the app, it provides 30 minutes of music and art visuals. Some of the visual stuff is interactive, like it's abstract art that may be taken from a painting of his, and then it'll break it into a faceted 3D image that you can twist and turn around in 3D space while his music's in the background. You can favorite things and create your own little album out of it. He just released sort of the 2.0 version of this app. It's actually a couple years old now, so he's generating new content for it. Whole bunch of new content came out, and I guess at the end of the day, if you don't like any of his music, you're not going to like it, because it is, still all his music. But he'll even tell you, like, this composition is 30 seconds recorded on this day, and instrumentation includes everything from pianos, synthesizers, like traditional instruments, to, I was listening to something today that one of the instruments was a door jamb, and he works it into the song. I think part of what he did is he worked with a technology company from, I think, Sweden. It's Scandinavian. I can't pronounce it. They made like sound and music effect processing software. And he just released this as a separate app. The Flux by Belew app is like $2-3. It's pretty cheap. And I'm sorry, Android folks or Windows Phone people, it's only an iOS thing right now. But he just released Flux FX, which is, I think it's $20. It's still not crazy expensive, but it's pretty powerful, professional grade multi-effect and audio processor app. It's only for iPad because you kind of need the additional space. Everything is, you can manipulate by touch, and of course things have sliders and knobs and that sort of thing, but they totally eschewed there's none of this stuff where it looks like, a phony pedal you're going to step on that has, fake chips out of the paint and all this crap. Like, you see all this kind of stuff in GarageBand plugins and stuff, and you can, buy phony versions of different effect pedals. It's not that. It gives you control over every single parameter of every single effect of every single thing. He calls it a tweaker's delight. And again, it's not for everybody, but if you enjoy creating music, things that are a little different, I can highly recommend it. And then if you just like listening to something a little different, check out Flux by Belew. It's pretty cool.
Keith, clarify for me, the VX thing, is that the new thing that just got released? Is that still comprised primarily of parts that he's recorded that you can manipulate, or is this different insofar it's something you can
yes,
punch in your own music into and manipulate?
Yes, absolutely. It's something that it'll work with any kind of wave file, any kind of sound file. You bring your own music, you bring your own sound to the table, and then anything you want from every kind of, reverb, oscillator, anything you can do, things you don't even know what the hell it does. Envelope filters run into a flanger, into an echo, into a synthesizer. It'll do it all.
But it's a standalone app, not like a GarageBand plugin, or it seems like it would have more use if we're actually running on a full-fledged Mac as opposed to on an iPad, just because I would think you would want to be able to connect it to a 4-channel input, or to get the raw source audio in.
You can connect it, again, you start going down the rabbit hole, but yes, there is a hardwired interface so that you can connect anything from tape machines. You can have a separate mixer where you're running into it all manner of microphones and instrumentation. You can be recording trumpets. And I think specifically he chose the iPad interface because they wanted to have touch control of things.
Interesting.
But, you'd be surprised the kind of processing power you can get out of an iPad these days.
Yeah, I guess my thought was more, and I haven't used it, so this could be an invalid concern, was just that like the ability to actually tie into those external devices the iPad is not exactly known for having a lot of inputs.
Right. But you only need one. Your actual inputs, all the analog stuff, is probably coming into a mixer. And again, this is professional grade. It's assuming you have a lot of this equipment already.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
Anyway, it's interesting and it's worth checking out. That one, it's $20 for that one, and it's not, anyone can fool around with it, but it's intended for serious musicians and audio people.
That sounds cool. Sounds like a good excuse to buy an iPad Pro.
Exactly.
So for our last new hotness segment, I was going to talk about a series that you've probably all heard about ad infinitum over the last 2 months, which is the Netflix series Making a Murderer. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the case itself. That's being done to death, in any number of podcasts and other forums. But what made it kind of interesting for me, it was definitely one of those shows like your classic binge series where you look up and all of a sudden you've watched 5 episodes straight and it's 3 a.m. and now you want to get online and find out more about the details of the case. And in doing so, I found that it was really, really easy to go down the rabbit hole. But that Reddit in particular, there's a whole subreddit around the show, the series, and the case. And I thought it was really interesting how a lot of the people in that subreddit were really using the internet as a resource for delving into the case and sort of pulling out more of the information that didn't make it into the documentary.
Yeah.
And in particular, one of the things I thought was kind of interesting about the way the subreddit was bringing sort of new/old data to light. In some cases, they were using the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, and actually like pulling out news stories and web pages from the local TV news channel reports and things like that from the time period, because the second crime was committed in, I think, 2005. I may be incorrect about that date, but in any event, it was the internet age was definitely already well upon us, and all the media outlets that were covering the case were constantly posting up news stories, and they were actually leveraging the fact that you have the Internet Archive where a lot of these older pages that might not still be publicly available got archived and were available as a resource. Also, another thing that they did was I'm not sure exactly how they went about it. I don't know if it was just a Freedom of Information Act request, but in the course of the 10 hours of the documentary, you see a lot of the trial, but you don't see the full trial. And there's no way they could include the full trial. But there are PDFs now of the full trial transcripts of the murder trial for Stephen Avery, and also for the nephew, I think. So there's like 5,000 pages of the raw trial transcripts, which to my knowledge is unprecedented, that you would have that level of detail about a high profile trial sort of just out there in the open on the internet for anyone to read and to comment on. I just thought it was really interesting how the Reddit community really sort of used the other tools of the internet to try to just surface more information about the case, because
fill in some blanks.
I mean, because when you watch the series, you definitely sort of feel you feel like it's unresolved, largely because Stephen Avery is still in prison. He's appealing, I believe. I know he's got a new lawyer now, but the current disposition of the case is, as far as the state of Wisconsin is concerned, he's guilty as a motherfucker, and he's serving time justly for the heinous crime that he committed. And pay no attention to the fact that he was in the middle of suing that county sheriff's department for $16 million, or no, I think it was $32 million, for wrongful, whatever the damages were for. It was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against that same county, which coincidentally and conveniently found all the evidence against him in this new case.
No kidding.
Yeah, so there's definitely, it's hard not to come away from the series feeling very skeptical about the new case against him. Although what's interesting too is within that Reddit community, while I would say the majority is definitely in the Stephen Avery got fucked by the state category, there are definitely some people on there as part of the discussion who feel he is guilty, and that, you know, even if the state didn't maybe do the best job prosecuting him, that they are in fact correct that he is the killer. So it's not like it's a cut and dried thing, even within that Reddit community. But I just thought it was really fascinating how that community was really kind of digging into the case.
The power of the digital people. Stefan, do you know what the subreddit's named?
I think it's just /making a murderer.
Cool. So here you are. You've made it to the end of episode number 2 of the Geek Tangent. Thanks for joining us. This is Chris reminding you to get in touch with us. You can send us an email at contact@geek-tangent.com.
And this is Keith here to remind you, go ahead and give us a review on iTunes. Anything that you say is appreciated, positive, negative, whatever, but 5-star reviews are best.
This is Stefan. Thanks again for listening, and hopefully you'll tune in for episode 3.
And this is Doug, and it's time to make the fucking chimichangas.
Nice.
Doug, why don't you do it one more time?
Wait, you really want me to do it again? Such a hard ass. All right.